Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Bea.
Good afternoon, everybody besides Katie.
Good afternoon.
Who recognised me. Thank you, Rod. Thanks very much for coming to this Lunch and Learn. I'm feeling very privileged to introduce you to Chris Jansen. So Chris comes from the University of Canterbury, and he's here today to talk to us about leading change. We don't know much about that in SCIRT. In my notes it says wait for the little chuckle. So I think it's really timely given the presentation that Duncan, or the communication that Duncan gave to us last Friday. The old cliche is the only constant we know is change, and for us it's around how do we build the capability within the SCIRT virtual organisation of dealing with that every day, because that's what we're here to do. We're about making a positive change to Christchurch and its future. So we're really privileged to have Chris here today to talk about this topic, because he is familiar with SCIRT. So we engaged Chris and another person last year to do an external review of our environment, of the environment that we're trying to create here around peak performance and high performing teams. So he's going to give us leading change in a wee bit in the SCIRT context, I would say. So I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thanks very much, Bea. Kia ora, folks. You're alive. It's great to be back here. So I was here in November last year and spent time with about 40 or so folks. Some of you are sitting here I recognise. And we were reviewing the peak performance plan. And I've got to say, it's great to be partnering with SCIRT on these things, because it's not always that you get to work with an organisation that's actually thriving. I work with organisations across education and health and business and all sorts, and to find an organisation that's actually, pretty clear about what it's going to be doing, is fully engaged, from a cultural perspective, and doesn't have a whole lot of politics and too much BS, is quite rare. So it's been great. And there's a bit of a deja vu feeling for me, because back in the early 90s I was a geotech engineer with Royd's Garden Consultants. Anyone ever worked for them back in the day? Or MWH? Yeah? Okay, so it's been kind of an interesting experience coming back into an engineering setting. So thanks very much for the invitation. So in our short little session, we're just going to talk about three things. And the first one is, I've said in the brief it was leading change, but I've actually switched it around. It's changing leadership, because really what I'd like to talk to you about is external from SCIRT, what's changing in leadership out there and the way people lead. And then secondly, we'd like to have a look, run that sort of framework over what's happening at SCIRT and give you some feedback around what I've seen. And thirdly, just actually lay out a little bit of challenge, an opportunity that you might be interested in. So let's get into it. Any time you ever read or hear anyone talk about leadership, they always talk about these things, and that is that the context is that we're leading in is very, very complex. And I'm not going to read out the slides or anything like that, but some of these phrases are very familiar in terms of our environment, our global environment, our local environment is very, very changing in a very fast way. And that's due to a whole bunch of different things. I mean, globalisation down the bottom there, technologies for sure, right, plus all the social issues that we're dealing with. And so what that does is it puts leaders in a different position than they were maybe 10 and definitely 20 years ago. And leaders are starting to have to deal with these kind of issues. Now these are not all negative. I mean, there's opportunities in here as well, and it's a bit of a two-edged sword. It's basically, in a word, it's a fast-moving, complex environment we're working in, and the type of leadership we need is different than what we needed in the past. And that's what we're going to unpack a little bit today. You could say there's an exponential rate of change, and Bea used a cliche before. Another one is change is changing. It's basically just ramping up and speeding up in terms of what's happening. And it's interesting reading some of the international studies on this, and they're basically saying this. And I know there's a lot of mountain bikes parked outside and a few kayaks on the roofs. So there's a few outdoors people work here. You'll relate to the last thing, the perpetual whitewater. There's a nice analogy for kind of our situation in terms of the complexity and the interconnectedness of what we're coping with. Now, that's global, that's New Zealand, but obviously we've got another context here which comes in on top of that. I'll just jump to that. So we've got our earthquake, post-earthquake situation here, which is obviously overlapped on top of all that global context, right? But it all fits exactly the same words, doesn't it? It's just concentrated and sped up and intensified for us as leaders in Christchurch. And it's interesting, again, reading what the international folks are saying, and this is not even in a post-earthquake situation. Most of our organisations are not equipped to cope with this complexity. By implication, most of our leaders are not equipped to cope with this complexity. So maybe it's my engineering background, but I'm a simple picture, visual kind of learner. And yesterday I knocked off early and picked up my kids from school, and they were very hungry. If you've got kids, you know what I mean. They get a bit scratchy. And so I made some popcorn, but we don't have a microwave because it fell out of the wall in the earthquake. So we gone back to old school and made it in a pot. And most of you remember doing that. And I was just intrigued as I put too much popcorn in the pot, and you could see what happened. It just about blew the top off. And I didn't make that mistake of opening the pot to have a look because it had a glass top. You've probably done that as well. When you open up the pot and it all flies out in your face. But I thought it was an interesting analogy for kind of what's going on here, and pardon my crude graphics, all right, but here's a pot, and that's not clouds, that's popcorn, all right, and there's some heat underneath it there. But if we could say, here's a question for you, if we could say the popcorn is pretty much the context that we just described, globally and locally, and the pot represents, we'll come back to that, the pot represents organisations that are dealing with that. Just a quick thought while you're munching your sandwich. What kind of qualities do you think that organisation needs to have to cope with the popcorn?
Flexibility.
You're allowed to interact?
Heavy lid.
Heavy lid? Yeah, it could be.
Bloody engineer.
Yeah, anything else? What kind of qualities would you want in your organisation to be up
Provide
there?
direction.
Pardon?
Provide direction.
Yep. Provide direction.
Flexibility.
Flexibility?
Responsive.
Okay. Yep. So some interesting qualities there. I've put down a few: adaptive, innovative, flexible, nimble, responsive, creative, resilient, and self-organising. Now, that it's interesting to think, does that describe your organisation? Now, in your case, you were thinking about SCIRT, but also your home organisation, because that's the context you're in here. Certainly, many organisations I've worked in would be a far cry from any of those words there. Now, what's the yellow, what's the heat in this case? All right, and that to me is going to be what kind of leadership would be required to create those qualities there in the pot, basically. So let's have a look at that. You know, pre-quake, would you agree with me that Christchurch is probably known as the most traditional place in the country?
Yes.
I mean, maybe Ashburton, I don't know. You know, we loved our tradition. I mean, we loved our old buildings and all that, but we also loved our old ways. And I don't know about you, but I've banged my head up against old ways many, many times over my career where I tried to innovate, and you sort of get that glazed over look in the eye and sort of like, well, we don't do it like that around here. Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of attitude. And that's got a lot of strengths to it, and the tradition was amazing. But I think we were well known for that. And I remember leaving Christchurch to go to Auckland for that very reason, because I was wanting to innovate and go to a place where I had more freedom. Now, that was good and bad. But do you think we're still known for that? No. As the most traditional place in the country? I don't think so. You would have read this maybe in the Herald, I think, not the Herald, the Press. This was the end of last year, I think. Lonely Planet's named us in the top 10 cities to must-see cities in the world. I think we're number 6 in terms of must-see cities for tourists, which is interesting. And why is that? Let's have a look what they're saying. I like the energy of what Christchurch is doing. You're currently living with a constant change, and it's really exciting to see a city embrace that. Right? So there's kind of a, and you know this as you drive around, there's kind of a dynamic going on here in the city, certainly in some regards in terms of startup, sort of pop-up kind of energy. Let's have a quick look at that, because I do think Christchurch has really changed its image in a big way. Have you been down to the Pallet Pavilion? It's about to be taken away, but it's on the old Park Royal Crown Plaza site. and Gap Filler's done this, but they were interviewed on telly on the second anniversary. Was it a couple of weeks ago? And it's interesting what Coralyn said about the reason they do things like the Pallet Pavilion and the bicycle-powered movie theatre, you know, and the Dance-O-Mat with Prince Charles, I think. Why do you do sort of random things like that? The reporter was from Auckland, I think, and we were sort of looking down his nose, kind of like, why do you bother? These are kind of quaint, but you know, what's the point? And it was interesting, she talked about this. It's about fostering this here. In fact, I'll read it out. This is about encouraging a dynamic of experimentation and innovation to get people engaged in the rebuild of Christchurch. So this is the shape of this dynamic. This is why Learning Planet's interested in what's going on here. I'm quickly going to show you some images of post-quake, and it's not for that sentimental sort of, you know, looking back reason, but I want you to think from a leadership perspective. What leadership do you see in these photos? So I'll quickly whip through them. Question, what sort of leadership do you see? This lady came from, I think, Nelson, to come and be part of the Student Volunteer Army. And this lady here, she's part of starting a pub at the Anglican Church in the suburb where I live, which is really great. You've seen the libraries and the book, bridges and the cafes, and this is down the road, you know, from where I live in Heathcote, with a cafe and a horse paddock. And you might have been to Revival Bar, anybody? It's a pretty interesting place, all in containers again. And of course we've got this. And then we've got communities doing all sorts of things that are not being driven from any city plan or anything at this stage. And who saw this? Particularly on the first anniversary, all those flowers popping up, you know, and I wasn't part of the Facebook loop that organised that, so I was surprised driving the road and seeing this. This might have driven some of you crazy, I'm not sure. But it's your cones, isn't it? But all of these things are self-organising, all right? Can you tell me what kind of leadership do you see in those photos? Or do you see leadership at all?
Humble.
Okay, humble. What was it? Example. What do you mean? Providing an example of the outcome they want to see. And what was that on? Servant, leadership, okay. Any other attributes? Grassroots, yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of that happened because the power went off and the news went off and all of that, and you didn't really have a boss for a while, did we? And so you had this opportunity to actually get out and do something because there was a need right in your face. Right, but it's interesting how that dynamic's carried on. Now, I'm less interested in the immediate post-quake response. I'm more interested in what that means for leadership now in this context we're talking about. So let's just have a quick look at that. You know, this is just a very small organisational chart, but I've asked you the question, where is the leader in that chart? What would be the answer?
Everywhere.
Yeah? And the CEO says that? What did the rest of you think? You probably can't answer now. Yeah, of course. I mean, we tend to look at the leadership or the leader or whatever as to being the top team, you know, the senior leadership team or the CEO or whatever, and that's where it tends to reside. And the people down in the ranks wouldn't see themselves as leaders. That's pretty prevalent. Yeah. So this is one of the major changes we're seeing in leadership in terms of who is the leader. All right, and moving away from the idea that we even look for a leader, but we think less about the position of a leader and more about the action of leadership. Right, so leadership is not the leadership, as in Duncan. It's leadership as a verb, as an action. It's a concept, a thing we can actually do and contribute to. And that's a massive shift, right? Because it affects everybody down the different areas in terms of the organisational chart. Let's just have a wee look at that. I've got a couple of videos to show you, right? But what do you see there? You see a big old machine?
Mission cards.
Yep. You know, almost all of our management frameworks and all the training that we do, like we do from Canterbury, you know, and anywhere in the world in terms of leadership and management, is based on this. It's based on the machine model of a highly efficient, well-oiled machine. all right? And all the frameworks come out of that. And it can do some amazing things, but there's lots of things it can't do, all right? And so the question these days really for leadership is, how else, if we can't organise this way, or if there's some downsides to it, how else could we organise ourselves? Now, I'm just going to show you a random video and just see another way of organising ourselves. All right, oh, the video's about to come on. What do you think that is?
Birds.
That is starlings. Let's have a look at it.
Should be impossible.
Sorry about the music, but just have a wee look at how do you think these birds do this? So I'll just pause it there because of time, but do you have any idea how they do that? I mean, there's 300,000 plus and they never collide, for example. Anyone got any clues?
Looking at neighbours.
Pardon?
Looking at the neighbours.
Looking at the neighbours, for sure. Anything else?
Following leaders.
It's a very common phenomena in the natural world. You know, you see it with fish, and you've probably seen it in all sorts of different species. Do human beings do this kind of thing? Well, yes, sometimes they do. Post-quake they did. All right. Do they do it in organisations? Often not. All right. What's happened in Egypt a few years ago? Yes, they did. All right. All sorts of different factors, and I don't want to go into the detail of how that happens, but it's a phenomenon called self-organisation, and it's pretty much another way of thinking about organisations here in the current context we're in. In a nutshell, what it's about is getting rid of organisational charts that look like the one on the left and thinking more about networks. So there's not an obvious top or a bottom, and there's much more interconnections between the different parts. Another way of looking at it is this analogy here. It's a great book called The Starfish and the Spider, but it's two different types of organisations, and the author compares starfish organisations as spiders. Spiders have a head with legs, like the hierarchy, the bureaucracy, and starfish, apparently the blue one there, it's found in Fiji and a few other places. If you chop off a leg, not that you want to, but you know, if you did, it grows back, and if you chopped it in half, it grows into two starfish. And the reason it can do that is it's got a decentralised, intelligence system basically, and it can replicate itself. Whereas if you chop a spider's head off, it's finished. And the idea the author's saying is a decentralised, networked organisation wins hands down over a top-down hierarchical organisation. And it compares all sorts of industries, showing the second is basically competing a lot stronger than the first one. So if you look back at that, the old school, I guess, way of thinking about organisations is the machine model, the industrial, sort of efficient, well-oiled machine. And you've got this new way, which is a little bit edgy, all right, but it involves people self-organising. I'll just quickly whack this down, but there's obviously some pluses and minuses of each. Your machine is very efficient and reliable, but it's inflexible and slow to respond, right? And I know plenty of organisations like that. The living organism is a little bit messy and spontaneous and a bit loose, right? But it does have it all over the machine in terms of innovation. So if you were the leader running the show and you knew this kind of tension or a continuum, what would you be trying to do you think? I think you'd be going to the right. You sure?
Depends on the leader.
Depends on the leader, yeah.
Depends what your organisation needed to do.
Yeah, true. Depends what your organisation needed to do in the context. All right. But I know what I'd be doing, and I'd be trying to get the strengths of both sides. All right. And that's really the name of the game. We're talking about a hybrid, which sits in the middle, and it plays off the tension between the strengths of a machine, because we do want something that's well organised. We need to have job descriptions and know what we're doing, but we need to have enough freedom to be able to innovate. Right. So create some sort of hybrid. So this is the way leadership's moving, and I want to come back and think about the SCIRT situation just in a few more minutes.
This man.
No, I'll just throw this up there. So the second question is, So we talked about who's leading now, and that's changed, but how do they lead? I'll just show you
This man right here is my great.
Say that again.
This man right here is my great grandfather. He was the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. And if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like in the world.
EDS, managing the complexities of the digital economy.
So that's real, eh? That's true. My daughter looked at that, she said, Dad, cats can't swim, can they? I'm like, I don't know, can they? So if we're talking about a shared role in leadership, what does that leadership look like? And I'm just going to quickly throw up some words, and you tell me if you think of yourself as a leader, do you have any of these qualities? I love this photo. It's way more insightful than, say, like something like that. I could give you a leadership model, but it's a bit of a waste of time. But this is, to me, it cuts to the chase. The organisation's looking the wrong way while the line's sitting right behind them, right? But what kind of leadership would I be looking for? Would I want to be? Let me throw up some words. Informal, all right? It's about dreaming up ideas and informal things. I can't believe the number of deals I do in cafes these days. And I do believe SCIRT, the deal might have been done in a cafe or something, immediately after the February quake.
Near the pub.
Was it a pub, was it? I was trying to be careful. So connected, all right, so that's basically having big ears and listening to the different things that are going on around the sectors and around the cubicles, you know, and picking up on ideas and pulling them together. You know, that's a very academic term, isn't it? But I made that one up. Unprecious, you know, this egos get in the way a hell of a lot. All right, and seriously, we need to, you know, just put that aside. Agile, not sort of in the Sonny Bill Williams kind of way, right? But agile is about being ready to grab opportunities as they come up, because the window's open and the window's closed, and it's been quick enough to grab those opportunities. I love this one, subtle, all right? The leadership skill I think is required is like my hands. If I can hold the microphone in my hands, it's not, well, I'll put it's not this, too prescribed, but it's not too loose either. Because if I do that, nothing will happen. So it's a matter of being subtle with the amount of direction I give. So subtle with the direction I give. Inspired, willing to change the BAU based on some higher reason, because that's the only reason you do that, isn't it? If you had a higher incentive. Gutsy, because you take a lot of flack when you take risks and you might actually cock it up. And then what are you going to do? And lastly, engaged. You know, that it's scary looking at the engagement surveys internationally and seeing that I think 30% of employees are fully engaged in work. You know, I know that's different here and that's a good thing, but that's kind of, you know, an international benchmark. So it's about being fully engaged and bringing your full self to your work and creativity and everything that goes with that. So, look, just in the last couple of minutes, and I know it is your lunchtime, I'm just going to share a couple of things about SCIRT, how it fits with these things. This is the first paragraph in the report we did, all right, and I'm not sure who's seen the report or whatever, but SCIRT is best described as an organisation that, despite operating in a complex and uncertain environment, has a clear sense of purpose, an outcome focus, and a team of aligned and committed team members. Team members across SCIRT have responded to the enormous challenge of reinstating the horizontal infrastructure of the entire city by 2016. Now, look, I know that there's niggles, you know, and there's little things that need fine-tuning, and that came up in the report as well. But there's so many things I could talk to you about in terms of the qualities of what's going on at SCIRT, and I'm not going to do that now, because it's not really what I'm here for. But if I was, it would be things like that feeling of walking in here into a kind of a high-octane environment, which I don't know if you still get that, but I certainly do when I come in here. The alliance contracting, that kind of thing, I think is pretty fascinating. You know, the United Nations of Engineering that some people talked about, this kind of bringing 80, is it, consultant groups together. I love the pain gain thing, although I know it has some ups and downs, but the KPIs that are in there for collaboration, the delivery guys talked about having a KPI on community engagement was an amazing thing for them and very unusual. Right? So I could go on and on about all sorts of qualities from SCIRT, but I actually just want to talk about one thing, which I don't think you actually write anywhere, and that's a legacy organisation. Now we're all Kiwis, so I'm not sure, is this written anywhere? Is this in your marketing? The idea of being a legacy organisation? I don't think so. No. It would be kind of stink as a Kiwi to say that, wouldn't it? Because you just set yourself up to be shot. All right, but tell you what, in interviewing many of you, this came up a lot. Like, what can we leave in Christchurch? And I've thought a lot about that, and that's really the message I want to leave you with today. Is clearly you're going to leave this legacy. And I know you've got what was it called last week? The big challenge thing.
Breakthrough challenge.
Breakthrough challenge. You've got a big challenge ahead of you, right? But your performance is at an amazing high level already. So I've got no doubt that will happen. So we'll leave with a legacy of great horizontal infrastructure in Christchurch. But what else? People talked about this, that what's happening here will change the way we do trenching and the way we do piping and the way we do trucking and the way we do all sorts of different things. Health and safety, long sleeves, etc., etc. That will last well longer than the lifespan of SCIRT. That could be quite prevalent around the country, perhaps internationally. Take it up a notch. Alliancing, it's quite different for New Zealand. And there's all sorts of things in the way SCIRT's been managed and the little quirky things. I mean, even the pain gain idea or all sorts of different things. The little focus teams that work on different problems, that could be adopted elsewhere. But I want to actually leave you with the challenge, and that is this one here. And this may or may not happen. But it occurs to me that how many people in the IS team? Is it how many hundred?
288.
288. So all of you, I assume, have a home organisation. Well, I know you do, and you'll go back there eventually, or somewhere else. All right, and you've experienced something for a number of years here at SCIRT, which is probably very different than your home organisation. That's certainly what you said. So the question I've got is, in terms of leadership and organisational thinking, what are you going to take back with you, and what are you going to do with that? Because I imagine most of you are reasonably senior in your home organisations, and if you're not, you will be after a few years. So you have an opportunity to do something with that or not, and that could be far more impacting than any of those first three. We could see a large-scale shift in the way we think about leadership and management in entire industries. Right? But really, that comes down to you, and I guess the challenge would be if you go back to Finch's or wherever you go back to, council, Opus, whatever, you go back there and let's say we come across each other in 5 years' time, and perhaps I come and do an evaluation on your performance and culture, what's happening in your home organisation, and how have you been able to influence that? I think there's a massive opportunity there, which is actually more influential than the horizontal rebuild, probably. Now I'm just going to leave you with some of your own words. This was a question we asked people in the review. What have you learned and experienced during your time at SCIRT that you believe would be invaluable for your home organisation? Now some of these things are management things, right? Remove 15-minute timesheets. This incentivises people to share and help each other. Leverage alliance principles. Use KPIs and KRAs to drive good behaviour. Scrap lowest price contracting. You may not necessarily agree, but this is what people said. Modernise IT and make it more responsive. Respect people's time, make meetings purposeful. Build in attributes and contracts beyond the money. Engagement with the community has multiple payoffs in terms of public image, improving brand and building strategic relationships. Integrate design and delivery. I mean, the floodgates opened when we asked this question. There was just so many things that you had experienced and wanted to take back. And this is the last slide, and this is the one that really cuts it for me. Some of the comments were about leadership and organisational thinking. Leadership is more performance-based than position-based. Well, that's kind of what we've been talking about today. Goal setting and individual accountability combined with a shared noble purpose is a powerful combination. We purposely never asked anyone what's the vision of SCIRT, but almost every interview people brought up the noble purpose of SCIRT. So it's a whole lot more than a laminated poster, and it seems in this organisation, which is pretty rare, to be fair. Give people a goal and empower them to reach it. Identify what people are good at and let them go for it. That's rare. Remove boundaries and move to a flat management system, open access to all levels of staff. Work on the business, not just in the value of coaching and reflection. And there was more as well. Right, so I'll leave you with these words because I think you really have this opportunity that I've shared. There is a new way of leadership and management out there that people are grappling with, and a lot of people feel overwhelmed by. You folks are experiencing it, and I'll leave the ball in your court. Thanks very much. Any